I'm attempting to build 100 houses in 100 real-life days in Minecraft. This challenge is a way for me to improve my building through trying lots of different new styles and techniques. The rules of this challenge are that the base of each house has to fit in a chunked area, and every day I have to upload that day's house to TikTok. So get yourself comfy and let's dive into day one. On day one, I decided to do something a bit close to home, do a medieval house. So here you can see, build up the foundation, build up the floor, decided to make a stone base and then go with these lighter sort of Tudor sort of feel, Victorian sort of feel walls with these high pointing roofs with that really cool gradient I like doing, with stone, terracotta and transition to concrete, red concrete. So I made these big roofs and I think they're really cool. I'm really happy with how they come out and they look great from a distance. Put this chimney here to create some life, did some smoke using glass and built a tree. I kind of regret the tree because it kind of blocks out the build, but it's an okay tree. Then add some rocks on the bottom, terraform it up a bit, and here we go, there's the final product. This is the house for day one. For day two, I wanted to do something a little bit different. So keeping with the medieval theme, I wanted to do more sort of something you might see on the side of a street roads, maybe a market road. So I built up a small area down the bottom that's made of stone, maybe a shop or something down there, and then on top a little living accommodation. Next to it, I decided to build a taller building out of, again, using white. So I built a clock at the top of it, so I came up with that design. I think that resembles a clock. You can look at that immediately and go, yeah, that looks like a clock, so why not? And then built these roofs on it using one red, one blue, and the other there's a spike. Come around the back, fill in all this detail, and I decided to add some leaves because it's quite an easy way to make things look good. Although one of the things I want to try over the course of these 100 days is to not use as many leaves in my builds because it's a bit of a cheat code because it just makes things look better. Day 3, I decided to change it up a bit. I decided to go for something Mediterranean, so built a little base, got some water, made it a little coastal house, started building a base out of white. The white bottom and then blue top, and then adding this deep slate roof on top of it. This was a super simple build that I did on an angle, which makes it a bit more difficult. I'm not super happy with how this one came out. So as you can see, I used loads of leaves and loads of greenery to try and disguise it a little bit, but I'm sure I can do a Mediterranean build better than that. So we'll have to see if over the course of the next 100 days there's something better than that. For day 4, I wanted to change up the biome, so I started laying down this sand base using sand and sandstone slabs to create that small mound. Then moving on to the main building, I used stripped oak and birch, and then transitioning to sandstone and then smooth sandstone to create a gradient on the base of the building. I laid out a tarp in front of it and used jungle oak to provide a roof. I built these cool towers. I'm really happy with how they turned out using this kind of Arabic style. Lots of colours, really colourful, and adds a bit extra bit of shape to the build, and I'm super happy with how they turned out. Come down to the bottom, lay out a path, cactus and some dead bushes. This build was quite a bit different to everything I've done so far, and I'm really happy with how it comes out. On day 5, I really changed it up. Started doing this modern house, using these two main segments, one made out of grey concrete and then one out of white. And using lots of big windows, I had to kind of put an interior on this one, unlike the rest of them, because you can see straight through it. I laid out a garden on the front that was very smart, very modern, and this is how it turned out. Yeah, it's an alright build. I'm not super fussed by it, but I'm just not particularly fussed by modern builds these days. On day 6, I wanted to really do something ambitious, so I laid out water on the floor and built a deep slate pillar coming up from the bottom. I then added a spruce platform on top of that and built a water wheel. And then coming back to the top, laying out another spruce platform on the other side, I started building the main house. Using spruce pillars and then dark oak trim, I started to build up this main house using the white for the walls, similar palette we've used before, and adding this orange gradient roof, which I really like. I think that really came out well. And then going above that, making a tower with a spire on top of that, then coming back down, adding a load of cogs and pipes to make it look super steampunky. And I'm really happy with how it turns out. I don't try this style often, but I'm definitely going to use it more in the future. Day 7, change it up again. We're going for a city sort of build. So using lots of whites on the building and then deep slate to accentuate the windows. So coming up, lots of tall building, lots of these pillars on the side, repeating that design back on the back side, but just with flat walls because I think it would be facing another building if it were put somewhere realistically. Come to the top, put a deep slate roof and add a bit of a gradient, making it lighter on the top, adding some gothic features with lots of spikes to really sell that time period it was in. Yeah, happy with this one. It's very white and I think I could do something a bit better, but we'll see. On day 8 I decided to go for something more rural, so I started building a small cobblestone and tough base and started to build this roof. The roof of this house is the main feature and features a really cool gradient that goes from birch all the way to moss. Really happy with how that looks. Really interesting roof and something very different from what you'd normally see. Come back around, start adding some extra details onto the roof and adding these windows poking through the roof, which I really like. Add a bit of extra colour. Built this chimney up there which helps add a bit more shape and put some wheat fields out the front. Really happy with how this farmhouse turns out. I think it would fit really nicely in a landscape with lots of trees and farmland around it. For day 9 I decided to build a sort of colonial house you might see in America. So using a lot of white bricks I laid out a front porch or veranda and used the androds and trapdoors to create a cool fence on the front of that, which I'm really happy. I really like that technique. The veranda's really cool. I really like how it turns out. We move back onto the main building. The main building's a little bit smaller, you don't see it as much because the veranda kind of hides it, but I'm quite happy with how it turns out. It's fairly thin, but I think the detail's nice and I really like the circular window poking out from the top. Tried to break it up with a few more browns so it's not just completely white, and I think I'd change it a little bit and make the trim around the roof deep slate. For day 10 I decided to build something that you'd see in Asia, so a Japanesey sort of build. So one of these pagoda sort of builds using copper and the white and dark oak. So laying up these white walls and using the copper to build these really intricate roofs. It was a little bit of a struggle to get them working on this small scale, but I think I made it work. I think on a bigger scale it would be able to come out better, but I think I did pretty well for this small scale. Coming up to the top, getting a spire at the top, and then getting some detail on the walls just to make it look a little bit more detailed. And there we go, there's day 10, and we've made it through 1/10 of the challenge. I'm really happy with this one. I think it's really cool. I really like the colours on it. The blue from the copper especially is a really nice colour. For day 11, I decided to do my take on a dirt house. So traditionally the dirt house is the first thing you build in the Minecraft world, but I wanted to take it to the next level. So using these walls made out of mangrove and muddy mangrove, and then building up the roofs with using dirt, coarse dirt and moss, and then a bit of dripstone in to add an extra bit of detail. This creates a much nicer shape than the box shape you'd usually associate with a dirt house. On top of that, I built a tree. This is kind of a swampy tree and I'm really happy with how it came out. The leaves are very droopy. And I added a load of roots on the bottom and they just help fill up it and make it look really overgrown and really sell that theme of a dirt house. On day 12, I want to start by building my own custom little biome. So making this swampy-like biome with water and then adding these small islands, lots of lily pads and greenery, lots of moss. I went up building some pillars from the bottom and then adding a platform on top of that. Then started to build up the main house using a gradient of mossy cobblestone to bamboo onto birch. And adding that roof on, adding a chimney. Really happy with how this one came out. I really like the biome. I think it'd be a cool idea to expand that biome over a much larger area and add some trees and some other decoration in. For day 13, I wanted to build a villa you might see in somewhere like the Mediterranean. So using a lot of sandstone, building these 3 main segments and adding roofs on out of jungle wood, which later I'll add a gradient onto. Building up this main tower with a little balcony, lots of windows with those blue sort of shutters. Coming out the front, filling up this pool, adding some decoration like some sun chairs and umbrella. I quite like this build. It's quite simple and with a bigger space I think you'd be able to do a lot more, but I think it works for the space you've got. Day 14, I want to do something very different to what we've done before, so I decided to do a post-apocalyptic sort of build. So I started building this petrol station with a road coming through it. On top of the petrol station, the idea was that someone's camping out, hiding away from whatever the post-apocalyptic cause is, whether it's zombies or whatnot. Next to the tent on the roof, I built up a water tower with some beams on the top of it, a windmill, and then coming around onto the front, decorating the floor, making it look super scrubby. I'm really happy with this build. I think it's come out really well and I think it's really cool and different to what else we've done before.
Day 15, I started to build up a tower. So I built up this tower using lots of stone coloured blocks, going from deep slate all the way up to light grey concrete. At the top, I laid out a roof trim using dark oak, and then started to build up a spire using stone, diamonds, prismarine, then going onto the warped blocks. Coming back around the front, I did a window, or a few windows, one of a circular one, just to give that kind of whimsical sort of wizardy sort of feel. Coming around the front, laying a bit of terraforming down, and this is the final result. I like the shape and I like the colours. I think the colours are quite fun. I might have done the tower a bit differently, done it a bit thinner, but it works. Day 16, I wanted to do something different. So instead of building a house so much, I decided to build a horse-drawn cart. So starting with the wheels made out of the dark oak stairs, and then building this main structure. I played around with the structure a little bit, working out the shape of what I wanted, and eventually came to this. Gave it a house at the front, and also some tracks where the cart had been along. Then adding some flowers and ferns and grass around the front. Ended up playing around with it quite a lot, and this is what I came up with. It's alright, it's a decent build. I think I could do something better, but it's very different to what we've done so far. For day 17, I wanted to build up a cottage sort of house. So building up the walls out of this combination of stone blocks going from tough all the way up to dead coral and andesite as the lightest blocks. Adding these larger windows and adding another box, another house area around the front just to break up the shape, and adding on these windows of copper. This trick's quite fun because you can get a gradient of the windows using the different coloured coppers, and it just helps add a bit of interest. Coming around the front, adding a few trees on, and yeah, I'm really happy with this cottage. It gives very cottagey sort of vibes, and really happy with it. I like the shape. I think the shape is really cool. For day 18, I decided to play around with colours a bit more. So I started to build up this pink house, and then using dark oak trims around it, line the walls. Now the pink's a very interesting colour, but I think it works really nicely on here actually. It could definitely fit this into a townhouse. Using blue for like the roofs, I think works quite nicely. There's quite a bit of contrast. I built a chimney and used the glass trick to build up smoke. Came around the front, added a city sort of floor, lots of tiles and paving. And yeah, really like this house. I love the colours. The colours contrast each other a lot and it looks really cool. For day 19, I had the idea of building an animal made out of stone or something like that was carrying along a house. So I started building out the shape of a beetle sort of like animal. So using the different gradient of deep slate up to tough to mossy cobblestone up to moss on the top, I create this beetle. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. It's quite fun and it adds a bit of uniqueness to the build. On top of that, I began to build some small structures up on it, including this watchtower and then the main building, which is kind of like an apartment complex you might see that's been ripped off and has ended up on this post-apocalyptic scene on top of this stone beetle's back. And this is how it turned out. I'm super happy with it. I think it's so fun. It's such a unique build. Having that beetle underneath that and then having the building stacked on top of it. Yeah, I'm really happy with this one. For day 20, we're going back to the medieval sort of vibe. So I started building up a stone base to this house and then coming up with some white walls. I know we've said that before, but this one's quite different. It's really big, this house. It's probably the biggest house we've done so far. So doing these big roofs and then this tower in the middle. This house is big. Adding lots of detail using the lecterns, lots of purples, using the nether brick walls to add a bit of colour. And then coming up with this purple roof on top, which is quite fun, using another gradient and having a spire on top of this tower. Building the windows as scaffolding, and this is it. This is the final product. It's huge, this one. I think it's quite cool. I like the colours, and I wish I could have had a better angle of it, but it's kind of cramped. For day 21, I started building up a mushroom house. So started building this mushroom, thickening up that base, making that base or the stem look like a really nice shape. Then coming up and building the shape of the mushroom, or the cap, I think, of a mushroom. Building that up out of red concrete and then adding white spots in using smooth quartz. Then coming back down onto the stem and adding some windows in, just to make it look a bit house-like, using the jungle rather. And then adding a path, lots of mini mushrooms hanging around the bottom, and there it is. It's a really cute little house, and I think you could disguise it in a mushroom forest or something like that and it would look really cool. Day 22, I'm taking us back to the Asian sort of style. So I started to build up this Asian street house sort of build with these iconic Asian roofs with the uneven roofs. using prismarine and the warp trapdoors. So I built up that roof using the main house, building that out of spruce and the mud, the walls. Then next to it I built up a different house, similar sort of style, but this time with white walls and then mangrove for the roofs. Laying out a street in front of it, adding on some lights which help add a nice little bit of detail, some flowers and ferns out the front. For day 23, I decided to build a jungle house. So this turned out being more of a jungle mansion rather than anything. So using a combination of jungly sort of blocks, including the jungle wood, bamboo and moss, I started out building this intricate shape. The main feature of this house is the two towers with a little bridge between them. I came back down adding a load of leaves to make it look super jungly and adding this tree out the front. So I'm really happy with this house. It's come out really well. It's got lots of greenery and I love the colours. I love the shape as well, and I think I made it look really big for being contained in that 16 by 16 chunk size. For day 24, I had the idea of building a shipwrecked ship that someone had moved into and built like a small shelter inside of. Using darker bricks with black stone, deep slate and then copper to do a trim around the ship, and then building up masts and the front bit, whatever that is on a ship, out of basalt, and then making the, wow, I really don't know any ship terms, the kind of like rope that you have between. I did that out of dark oak, and then building up a beach in front of it and adding in that small shelter out of oak wood and then a tarp out of wool and smooth quartz. I'm really happy with how this build came out. It's very different to what we've done before, but I think it's a really cool style and lots of nice colours in there. For day 25, I started building up a white cottage. So I built up this front wall first, focusing on these large windows and having that gradient from andesite, diorite, calcite and wool down to white concrete along the front. Add a blue door in, started building up the roof, again using another gradient from oak all the way to mud. Built up all the walls around the back and added some little details to the windows, and then built a balcony and a door, glass door out to that balcony. Added some trees and did a bit of terraforming around the front, and here's the final result. It's a bit of a bigger scale than I normally do, but I think the colours in it are quite nice. For day 26, I started building up a stone cottage. So I laid down a stone base and started building a cottage. So the idea of the cottage is it's nice, made out of stone, with that like gradient from tough, using the coral all the way to andesite, which creates quite a nice gradient if you're trying to build quite like a cobbly, stony sort of build. Added on the roofs using mangrove, and then added a bit of netherrack in there as well, and then added some windows with the window frames being sandstone and then birch, and it just adds a nice bit of contrast. And you can use some fun shapes of the stairs to create these circular windows. For day 27, I decided to build a villa. So I started building this stone base with some gaps underneath and adding the door. Coming up, I started building the main shape of the upstairs with a little courtyard out the front, courtyard balcony sort of area out the front. So I added on these shutters, I decided to go bamboo, added some glass doors through the middle, added on the roof and added an area at the front, put some trees down, and this is the final result. It's quite an interesting build. You definitely see it as a sort of villa you'd see out in Spain or Portugal possibly. Day 28, I started building a fisherman's house. So I laid down a little ocean in front. So filled up this ocean with water and started building the house. It's on a raised platform coming out of the sea is the idea. So then started building the house using a trim of dark oak for the roof, and then filling in the roof with lots of blue colours with that gradient from stone all the way up to warped planks. Coming back to the front, adding a load of details, including a nice window, and then adding some tyres around, and then added a little boat on front with that sail, which is quite cool and adds a bit more to the build. I really like this. I like the colours. I like how they contrast with each other, the blue to the dark oak, and then the orange of the window. Day 29, I went back to build as something that you might see in a city. So I got this idea from Instagram, a post I saw on Instagram, using glass panes in front of quartz to make this sort of pillar looking shape. And it just helps round the shape off a bit and make the pillars look a bit rounder, which is kind of the idea I was going for. So I built up these large pillars out the front of the build, and then the rest of the build behind that I filled in with a gradient of mud to brick. Added on some windows and details, added on some plants, and this is the final result. It's a little bit tight in space, but I think the effect's there. I think I could have done something a little bit better with the roof. I think that's a little bit plain, but I think it works. For day 30, I decided to build a castle. Start by laying down a small floor plan and building up some towers and a gate at the front of the build. Behind that, I started to build up the main keep using that textured roof that we've used a few times with the red. Built up some small spires on top of the towers at the front and started building up the main tower and a little side tower that goes up next to it. Built the spires on top of them, again using this red gradient, added some detail around it and added the bridge connecting the two. Built up some small towers on the side and came down to the front, laid out a moat, put a drawbridge and started adding some extra decorations. Coming back up, I added some windows and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Not so much a house, but someone could definitely live in a castle. In fact, people do all the time. For day 31, I had the idea of building up a small cyberpunk apartment. So this involved having lots of different segments of lots of different colours. So as you can see, we start building it up. The building process is fairly simple, using a bit of gradients in some places, but it's all about trying to have lots of different colours mixed in with the more toned, the more shade sort of colours. Coming round, you see the time lapse here, we're going round quite quickly, building up lots of colours. You've got the yellows, greens, purples, blues, and yeah, this is the final result. It's a little bit hard on this small scale to try and build up something like this, but I think I sort of get the effect across. Day 32, I had the idea to build up a fairy tale house. So you might remember the story about the lady who lived in the boot, so that was what this house was based on. So I started up building this boot, tried playing around with the idea of laces, but it didn't really work out. I built up this main shape of the boot, and then came up, added the roof on the top and a little area at the top, added a door and some windows and a chimney, and then added another window through the roof just to add a bit more interest. Laid out the terraforming in front, and I think this is a really fun little build. It's very different, very unique, and I really like the way it's come out. For day 33, I started just playing around some blocks that I don't really normally use. So the idea was just to use the composters and lecterns. So on the ground floor, I played around with having 2 wide beams of dark oak logs, bringing that up, having a row of lecterns surrounding the main upstairs bit. Added on the roof with a blue gradient, added in a path, added in a small mountain area, a bit of raised land, and then started building this main tower to the side of a build. Normally, I always build spires, so I was like, I'm going to change it up, and we put a dome on there. Added some custom trees in, and a bit of terraforming with some rocks around, and I'm really happy with the final result. It's fun, and I like the colours. The colours work really well. It's nice having the bit of raised land next to it. For day 34, I decided to build another sort of Tudor style house. So I laid out an area using stone at the bottom, which is what we've done quite a few times, but it's quite a good trick. And then started building up the main area on top, using lots of dark oak and using signs to create thinner strips of white and the darker wood colour. Added on some acacia trapdoors to act as shutters, then added on this roof, which I textured with deep slate, which gets darker towards the top. Added some windows poking through the roof, added a path down at the bottom, and added a chimney on out of black stone. Added some terraforming on, and I quite like the result. It's only a small little house, and I think the proportions are a little bit weird on it, but it's okay. For day 35, I started at first laying down this stone foundation for the house to sit on. Then, using a gradient from jungle all the way up to sandstone, I started building up these walls. One of the interesting techniques I used in this build was using lecterns. This just helps make the windows a different shape, which can add a bit more to your build rather than it being so blocky. Coming up using the roof, making the trim out of a mix of redwoods, and then adding on this roof with a fun gradient that ends up in amethyst, which is quite a unique colour. Coming back down, adding on a load of detail, leaves, and I really like this build. This is one of my favourite builds I think we've done so far. The colours, the purples, are really nice and they contrast really well. For day 36, I decided to take inspiration from a house I'd seen up in Aberdeen. Now this house it's stunning. It's all made out of stone and it's got some really interesting sort of circular features that come off of it. As you see, we start building those up. I started building up the front first with these 2 circular areas coming off the front. One of them's got large windows, the other one's got a bit more of a spire on top of it. The rest of the house is fairly simple. And I kind of improvised the back. I kind of did that. It's my own design, but I think it's come out really nicely. I think it's actually quite turned out well and quite looks a lot like the actual house does in real life. So I'm really happy with that. The idea for day 37 was to build a farmhouse. So I started off by laying down this floor foundation and then building up these pillars using spruce wood and then the walls using oak wood. The side I added a small pen over for animals that we put in there for the future with a building hanging over the top of it. Came up building the walls on the second floor out of this Tudor style white material we've used a lot, then building a gradient roof out of copper. Came down to the front, laid down a load of terraforming including a path, and I've loaded details on including the window decorations and using stairs to help it look a little bit more dilapidated. For day 38, I had the idea of building a gatehouse. So one thing I wanted to do with this idea was to really just use a lack of depth in this build and instead using texture to convey all the depth there is. So this is a technique used by very good builders and I'm definitely not there yet, but as you can see, we use the andesite for the darkest bits and have a gradient down to the lighter bits. The idea is you have your darker bits along the top and in the corners, and then under windows as well, you have lighter colours where rain or something might have dripped down from there. You see the final product, and it's definitely just learning this new style and just getting used to it and then getting better at it ultimately. For day 39, I decided to start laying down a stone foundation like we've done many times before, using a bit of moss to transition up. The top floor I made out of copper. I round off the edges using wools and used the copper gradient from the slightly weathered to the fully weathered copper. On top of that, I laid up a roof using a bit of a gradient of stone textures all the way from moss. Came in, added details to the windows, and then I had quite a bit of fun with terraforming out the front, so adding a pond, stone path, lots of ferns. I really like this build. I really like the colours, and I like the shape of it as well. It's a super simple build, but I think it's really cool. We've now reached day 40, so we're getting through this challenge quite quickly, or it feels that way. It also feels like it's taken a long time. For today's house, I decided to build something modern. So using modern oak sort of beams, quartz, ice, and then having the idea of having these green roofs, and then having a waterfall that actually comes down off the roof, flows into a pond, goes through a river, and then having this terrain. I think it's quite fun. I think it's quite a nice take on a modern build. For day 41, I decided to make a medieval sort of blacksmith sort of build. So this is using a lot of similar techniques to what we've used before, but with a slightly different shape. So building up a small stone foundation at the bottom, then coming up dark oak and white walls, building along this roof, filling it in with black stone this time, adding a little window through the roof and adding a side area for the blacksmithing. Adding on details, including pots of lava that the blacksmith would use to craft weapons and stuff. I actually really like this one. I like the bamboo. I've not really done that before with this sort of style, but I think that's a really nice colour to have in for the shutters. For day 42, I really wanted to just play around with using lots of different blocks. Not so much to create dizziness and noise, but kind of also do that as well. So the idea for this build is that it's an aqueduct that's kind of broken down. So you've got the main pillar and then this arch that comes off of it, which is broken down and is leaking water into this swampy sort of area. So I really tried to focus on using this wide range of blocks that have quite different colours, but kind of blend together through shapes and stuff. But I think it's really fun. Really happy to keep practicing this sort of style and just building up my ability to use different sort of blocks in different sort of areas that you wouldn't necessarily expect. For day 43, the idea was to build a Viking house. So I laid down a frozen river, built up some rocks, and then started building a snowy mound to put the house on. The idea for this house was that you've got an old Viking ship that they've got, and use that as the roof. So I worked on creating this quite intricately shaped roof with quite a bit of fun texture in it to keep it interesting. Added some ice coming off it and then had the building under it. The actual walls aren't particularly detailed, but I think that roof is really cool and a really interesting feature, and the landscaping it sits on is also really cool as well, so happy with that. For day 44, I started building up these pillars. These were some platforms that were going to hold up a house. So I built up a house using mud, using that texture from mud all the way up to sandstone, which is quite a fun little texture. Then built a second platform and added on a whiter house. I built these roofs using deep slate and then built a tower at the top with copper roof. Built some ladders bringing the person up to the side, and then built a shipping container next to it to kind of add to that post-apocalyptic sort of feel. Did some texturing down the bottom, and yeah, I'm quite happy with this result. I think having the things on the platform is quite fun. Day 45 I decided to build a castle, so I started laying down a base of tuff, then built up a platform on top. The idea was to have this transition from moss all the way up to mossy cobblestone, all the way up to stone, and the grey wall as the lightest texture. So I built up this main building with the deep slate roof, built up 2 towers, both of those are deep slate roofs as well, and the dark oak trim, and I really like those towers, I think they come out quite nicely. Added a bit of texturing on the front, and added some trees. I really like this build. It's a small little castle, but I think it's really good. This could be a really cool starter base actually, if anyone wanted to do it for that. For day 46, I want to challenge myself to use a block we've not really used for walls yet. So that colour was using orange. So using a mix of acacia, orange terracotta and copper, I built up this walls. Fairly simple shape, just a small cottage. Added some dark oak just to add a bit of contrast. And then added on a deep slate roof with brown filling in that roof. Add some bamboo behind the windows just to add a different bit of colour. Then added a tree out the front to make it seem like quite cosy and quite suburban sort of house. This house kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you played The Simpsons Tapped Out, the orange house in that. I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but it's just clicked in my head now. Day 47, I really pushed it out, and this is kind of one of the most interesting or different builds, one of both we've done so far. So I decided to go kind of like a futuristic sort of space sort of theme. So I built up these houses using warped wood and quartz and having them floating in the air. I built 2 of them because I felt like one didn't really get the vibe across that it was floating around, and this is a really fun effect. I think if you built up like a whole colony of these sort of builds with like spaceships, flying cars going between them, that'd be really cool. But yeah, it's definitely different. For day 48, I decided to go back for the medieval sort of theme, so like we've done a million times before, laying down a stone base with wooden pillars and filling those wooden pillars in with white. The difference for this build was the roof colour, so I wanted to play around with doing a yellow gradient, so one that goes from a bit of orange to yellow. It took a little bit of time to figure out the blocks I wanted to use for it, but eventually came with this, and I'm really happy with how that's turned out. I really like that colour gradient we've got. Played around with the windows on the front, eventually decided to go for this orange circular window, added on some leaves and some rocks, added in a bit of terraforming, a few ferns, and I like this house. I actually think I'm going to use that yellow roof again, I think it's really nice. For day 49, I took inspiration from Mumbo Jumbo's Hermitcraft build, so I decided to build this sort of factory style build. So I built up these main walls out of brick, using granite and mud to help add a bit of interest into the textures. Added on a roof, added on some copper to add a bit of colour, and added on some chimneys. The main tower I built up with some almost castle-like bits at the top, and then added on a load of mechanical detail like pipes and stuff like that. And I really like this build. I like the colours on it, and I think it does the job we're trying to do really cool. I like the smoke and the chimneys that we've got. For day 50, I decided to start laying out some blue pillars. So the idea of this one is it's going to have some really big roofs on it. 2 segments, you've got a smaller segment out the front and then a bigger segment out the back. Also I had the idea of putting on a conservatory, so added that on using more blue, more of the warped wood, then added in this gradient roof that goes from blue to red, which is quite fun. The red mainly dominates it though, which adds a bit of contrast. Added on a tree and did the terraforming out front. And yeah, this is quite a cool build. I think I probably could have done a little bit more with it, but it was also kind of limited in space. And with that, that marks the halfway point of this challenge. Thank you so much if you've made it to this point so far. This challenge has taken almost 2 months so far, and the whole thing has taken just under 4 months. So it's been quite a big task to do. But thank you to everyone who's got to this point so far. If you are still watching and enjoying, if you could like and subscribe, that'd be great. Support the channel, support the hard work this has taken, because this has been a lot of work, but I'm super happy with the outcome. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you enjoy the last 50 builds of the video. For day 51, it's Christmas! Merry Christmas, everyone! So for today's build, I decided to do a Christmas theme. How could I not? So using these very Christmassy colours, including the reds and the yellows, I built up this building. So the idea was the main structure in the middle had this large window, which I really like the shape of. Added on a spire roof, and then tried putting a little Rudolph out the side. This was a little bit scuffed, but it kind of gets the idea across. Added on a tree and some decorating on the floor, and yeah, it's a very Christmassy sort of build. I really like that window. That window's a great shape. Definitely try and use that more. For day 52, I decided to go back and do another steampunk sort of build. So as we did with the first build, we built a platform coming out of the water, laid out dark oak base, the white walls, added on these copper roofs, started building the structure up. With this idea, you always want to have a bit of movement in, or at least implied movement when you do steampunk. So for this one, I added in a windmill, added in loads of pipes, and lots of copper decorations just to help it give that steampunky vibe. Added on some campfires for a bit more life, added on gears, and I really like this, how it's come out. I just love the colours of steampunk. For day 53, I started building up a tower, so using a gradient from moss all the way up to stone, which is what I quite like doing. It's quite a good little gradient. I built this main tower. Coming off that main tower, I had two smaller towers that were kind of like hanging off the side of it. And then for the main area, I built a circular area, added another tower on top of that. And the idea was this, we'd have quite a mystical sort of build. So I built up some floating circles around it, almost reminded me of Grian's base from the last Hermitcraft season. Add on a load of hanging leaves, and I think it's quite a fun outcome. It's a very sort of mystical, magical sort of build. For day 54, I decided to build a sort of base you might find hidden under the sea. So the idea was to build up this dome full of glass and then put a house inside that. I experimented with putting some blue glass on the outside, but I didn't have enough space to really fill it around, so it wouldn't have made the effects I wanted. The house was really basic. It was more about having this idea of having the dome, and in that dome I didn't have much space to play with. I probably could have done something a bit more, but I didn't want to distract too much from the idea of it. Added some coral around the outside and that palm tree in the middle, and I think it's quite a fun idea. You kind of just have to use your imagination that this house is underwater. For day 55, I got a comment from Mr. Aura07 on TikTok who asked for a random block palette. So the blocks I pulled were granite, dark blue glazed terracotta, birchwood, cut red sandstone, and andesite. So some of these worked okay together. The andesite to granite to red cut sandstone was an okay transition. The birch is okay, I can make a white building out of that, as you can see in the middle building. The blue glazed terracotta was a bit trickier, but we've got that for the roof of the middle building and hidden some details on the buildings to the right. And overall, I think for the blocks we got, which are quite ugly, we've done a pretty good job. For day 56, I decided to build a windmill. So I started building this stone base out of some darker blocks with a transition upwards. Kept that transition going up to the windmill base, and added on this white windmill structure. Added on some dark oak fences to add a bit of colour and wood kind of texturing to the build, and then built up this windmill design. This was quite a functional windmill, not very sort of, I feel like Dutch maybe realistic sort of windmill with those very straight kind of blades. So I think this turned out really nicely. I think the colours are decent, and it sits quite nicely. At the start of day 57, I decided to start by doing some terraforming, so building up this cliff face and then adding on some houses next to it. I added on a small waterfall and a little pond and stream coming off of that, and this turned out quite nicely. The first house I decided to do, I built out of red, and this was almost giving a little bit of post-apocalyptic sort of vibes with some of the detailing I did, but these houses turned out quite decently. The terraforming is a bit of fun, and it adds something different to the houses. Definitely some fun techniques here, like the windows design I've used for the house on the left, and some nice little details on there as well. For day 58, I decided to build a stone sort of city build, so maybe like an old mayor's house or something like that, that's kind of gone a little bit into disrepair. So for this I wanted to try working on some of the texturing of the tuff using the mud blocks and then a little bit of green terracotta, as you can see on the front. Built up this main structure with those pillars out the front, some copper accents around the windows, and added in some details including some bushes and stuff like that. I actually quite like how it came out. I could definitely imagine this being tucked away and kind of like under some trees, hidden inside a city. For day 59, I decided to build another medieval house like we've done many times before. So I started off with doing a stone base and then coming up to the second floor and doing more wood. So I kept the walls quite flat, which was a decision. It's not the best looking house ever, but we've got some fun techniques in there, like the roof being blue. But I think it kind of lacked a bit of detail, this house, and the colours on it weren't quite right. So I added on some leaves to try and improve that. But I'm not super fussed by this house. So for day 60, I wanted to do another modern build. So I started by filling in the floor with water, simulating sort of an ocean. I built these kind of hooks coming over, reaching over, and from that I suspended this modern sort of pod. Using lots of very modern blocks, like the grey concrete and the white concrete, this pod kind of hangs and it sits in the middle of the ocean. It's kind of like a very rich, very fancy holiday getaway. For the course for the next 10 days, I wanted to build 10 builds, each in different biomes. So for day 61, I started out with a plains biome, or plains meadow sort of biome, basically a flat biome, lots of grass, some flowers in it. So I started building up the structure, 2 main segments to it, adding on a load of detail and having some fun coloured roofs. The idea of this build is, because it's in a plains and it's quite a plain biome, I wanted to have lots of colour in it. So using lots of different colours, including the warped wood, the orange, the reds for the roofs, the acacia, and then adding a load of flowers on the bottom. I really like this design. This is one of my favourite designs I think I've done so far. The colours on it just are so nice. For day 62, the biome I chose to do was a desert. So we've already done a desert build, so we're going to take some similar ideas to what we've done before, but with just slightly different shapes. So using the gradient of stripped oak all the way up to sandstone, building out these very square buildings. I wanted to add a load of detail on, so lots of bits of wood, a few bridges across the buildings, a bit of tarp, and just, yeah, adding loads of detail and a bit of greenery, adding in this palm tree, which was okay. This is the final result. It definitely gives desert vibes, so I'm quite happy with that. For day 63, I was going to build in a forest, so started building up this massive tree. I think I built the base a bit too big at the start, so I ended up cutting that back a bit. But building up this tree, I really like the shape of the leaves, and you can see it works much better with the reduced base. Built a tree house in the tree, added some supports, allowing it to hang up, then built some more trees at the front to help create that forest sort of vibe. Came back, edited the floor, made it look a bit more foresty, a bit more worn, a bit less sunlight getting down to it, adding in some mushrooms. And this is a fun little build. The house is only small, but the trees, I think, are really cool. I like them. For day 64, we're doing a mountain build. So I started playing around with these rock textures, having the gradient come up to the lighter bits at the top, then playing around with the shape for main mountain, added on some moss in the lower areas, and then at the top of the mountain there was a bit more snow. So playing around lots of different gradients, lots of different grey colours, and then building this house. It's only a small house, but I really like the colours on it. It's quite fun. It almost gives some kind of sci-fi vibes with the prismarine, the copper, acacia, and the mangrove, and then the aerial at the top of it. Yeah, I really like this build. I think it's really fun. The colours work quite nicely. For day 65, the biome I chose was a snowy sort of biome, so I started up laying down this front area with a frozen river, started building up this bridge but didn't really vibe with it, so took it down and built a wooden one instead, which is a bit more simple. Then the main build, 2 segments that go from a little gradient of cobblestone all the way up to calcite, and then adding on these bold orange roofs that contrast really well with the snow. I really like these roofs, and I think it just works really cool. It looks super mythical, super mystical, and I think it's a really cool vibe. And then the window details, I used a bit of orange in there to help them pop as well, and a bit of warped. And I think it looks really nice, and I think it looks really magical. For day 66, the biome I chose to do was a swamp biome. So I started off building down a circular base, and then 2 main circular buildings. One a bit smaller, one a bit bigger. Using this gradient from deep slate up to moss, and then adding on these roofs featuring like brown terracotta sort of vibe. Added on a load of mushrooms to complete this kind of witch hut sort of build. Added on some like swampy areas, some mud and grass and moss and stuff around the bases. And I'm really happy with this build. I really like the mushrooms actually. The mushrooms add a really nice bit of colour to the build. For day 67, we're building a custom mesa. So I think I got the shape quite right on the mesa build, but I'm not sure I quite got the colours right. So you can see here I am adding in those strips of colour. I don't know, I just feel like something looks a little bit off on them, but maybe that's just my imagination. The house, I started building an old Wild West sort of build, so featuring the kind of front veranda and then sort of more solid roof, adding in some chairs at the front and a bar sign up the top. Come around the back, you can see I built a bridge between the two pillars, and it's quite a good build. I think is kind of limited with space. For day 68, the biome we're building in is the ocean biome. So I wanted to use prismarine as the main block here, and I decided to build a prismarine sort of fortress coming out of the sea. One problem with using all of this prismarine is it kind of blends together a bit. As you can see in the speed up mode, it kind of flashes the prismarine, so it's an interesting effect. But building up this kind of fortress shape, lots of towers, and then two main square building bits. Adding on some details at the front with some lily pads and stuff like that. And yeah, I think it's a decent build, but I think I shouldn't have used as much prismarine as I should have. I should have mixed in some other blocks with it. But the shape's quite fun. For day 69, nice, we're building in the nether. So I started building up this main sort of nether sort of shape with some fun holes in the back, and then building up a couple of custom trees, and then building the house. I wanted to build everything out of nether blocks, so as you can see that justified the colours we picked and the blocks we picked. Building up this nether roof above, adding some lava in and another tree. And yeah, this was the build I ended up doing. The build itself is fairly simple, kind of like other things we've done before, but with some weird colours. But I really like the nether trees. I think they look really fun. For day 70 and the last day of this mini challenge, we're building in the end. So I did my own take on it and kind of built like almost a bit of sea and a coastline in the end using the magenta glass. I built my own mini custom end ship. It's a little bit small, but I filled up the space I've got there at the front. Behind it, I started building up this tower, and I was mainly using purpo bricks. And this is quite difficult because nothing goes with them. But I think I did okay. There's a bit of texture and a bit of interest, and the bamboo works quite nicely with it. For day 71, I started playing around with the bottom floor using walls. This is a technique I've not really done before, but I think it worked out quite nicely and it gives you a bit of depth without having to fill up loads of space. I moved on to the top and used quite an interesting colour gradient. I'm not sure 100% it works, it looks quite busy, but I think it's definitely interesting. And this was the build I came up with. I think it's super interesting. Lots of different variation, lots of different colours, and a fun shape, I think. I think it's come out quite nicely. For day 72, I had a very ambitious project in mind. So I started building this base with the stone and then came up building some dark oak pillars. Moving up from that, the main feature of this house is the massive roof. So I did it out of a gradient of red using netherrack all the way to red concrete. The roof looked a little bit bland, so I added on some extra bits and added on a load of detail, and this build turned out absolutely huge and really cool. It does the effect I wanted it to, just have these draw your eyes towards these massive red roofs. Day 73 might be our tallest build yet. So I started building up these stone pillars and building up this tower. I did a bit of support at the base and came around and started adding some decoration, a bit of interest, some windows and stuff alongside the tower. One of the things I wanted to do was add a bit of texture beneath all of the sticky outy bits. So you can see we've got some tuff and acacia below all of that. Coming up to the top, a bit of clock tower, and finished in doing the spire, and this is the final result. Super tall build, it's quite skinny, but I think there's some really nice colours in, and the copper roofs I really like. For day 74, we're going for a city theme, so using this technique of using the stairs on top of full blocks to create kind of this intricate design, we started up building these apartment buildings. These came out really well. I'm really happy with these. The colours on the first one, I went for a jungle sort of theme, and the next one I went for a brown sort of theme with copper and then birch windows, which worked out quite nicely. There's a lot of detail in these builds, and I think it works really nicely. It'd be super cool to build a full city full of houses like this. day 75, we're doing something fairly simple. I just wanted to play around with some more gradients and just get more practice doing gradients. So using the main gradient of the andesite down to sandstone, which kind of creates this washed sort of white look. Used a bit of spruce wood and then the roof, which I did with blue, with the fun transition from stone all the way to the warped wood, using the diamond ore, which is quite a fun little technique. Adding on some extra details and some fun orange windows onto the front of the build. And yeah, it's a decent house. It looks quite nice. Nothing super advanced. Day 76, I'm doing the biggest build we've done yet. So for this one, I decided to build a cyberpunk style building. This was a super big building that took a lot of time to build, but I'm super happy with the outcome. So this main first building is out of white, and we used a load of gradients, a load of different blocks to create kind of like a washed sort of look, which I think has turned out really nicely. On the right side, we got some more shopping kind of at the bottom, and then 2 apartment buildings on top of that, different colours, one grey, one blue. And I'm super happy with the outcome. It's got loads of detail in, and it super fits that cyberpunk sort of vibe. For day 77, sticking on the theme of doing punk style builds, we're going for a solar punk build this time. Solar punk's quite a fun style because it involves loads of colours, loads of plants. So I started off building this space and then started layering on these segments of house. So we've got a yellow one, blue one, white one and orange one. And then coming through, adding a load of greenery, loads of leaves, loads of plants, and just create loads of life and a little bit of a human industrial style feel as well on top of that. For day 78, I started laying down this floor, this stone base, going from moss all the way to stone. Then on top of that, added the second floor, I used white materials using a gradient from diorite all the way up to white concrete. Added on a load of detail using spruce and made these windows, mixing in a couple trapdoor colours to create quite a nice window effect. Added a grass roof and added a load of extra details on, a few plant pots, barrels, stuff like that added in the terrain. And I really like how this build's turned out. I think it's really simple, just how it looks, but it works really effectively. For day 79, I wanted to experiment using a new technique. So this is a technique I've not really used before. As you can see here, it involves using the loom. I wanted to build these banners to try and create this Tudor sort of style. So I played around with a few different banner styles and created this kind of pattern. So the idea of it is to use thinner and different designs you can get with blocks using the banners. And yeah, it's definitely an interesting technique. I've definitely not mastered it yet. And the one problem with it, you can't see it from afar, but I think it's definitely an interesting technique to use. For day 80, I had the idea of doing a fantastical sort of castle-y tower on top of this massive stone pillar coming out from the water. So the idea of it was that this stone pillar would be kind of like a stack coming out of the water next to a cliff. Of course, I've not got space for the actual cliff side in this build, but we've got a bridge that's cut off that would lead to it. On top of that, I started building this fantastical sort of tower using the pink wood, added on a load of detail using the warped wood, and I think it's come out quite well. The shape's interesting, the curve is, I don't know if I would have done that again, but it's definitely lots of interesting colours in it. For day 81, I did another take on a tree house. This time I wanted to make it a bit larger, so started out building a bit of a bigger tree. The one tricky bit with tree houses in this challenge is that the plots are small, so the tree can only be so big without encroaching on other plots. The tree house itself, I wanted to make it something bigger, and this is bigger than the last one we did, but it's still kind of small. I got a lot more detail on this time, I think. But yeah, I really like this outcome. I just wish I could do a bigger tree, but also I don't wish that because that's awful and hard to make and lots of leaves. For day 82, I decided to build a cozy riverside cottage. So I started up placing this river down and building the first segment of the house. I wanted to use quite basic materials in this, but still have a bit of interest. Added on 2 extra sections of house, one with a fun warped roof, and then added in these trees behind to kind of create this overgrown sort of feel, very wooded sort of feel over this river. Added on a load of detail, a load of bits of nature, and a small boat out the front. I think it's come out really cozy. I like this build. Very natural, very, very forested. Day 83, I had the idea of building a Japanese temple, but instead using very dark colours and then a red roof. I wasn't super happy with how this build turned out, and I was fiddling around with it a lot. As I found earlier, it's really difficult for me to do these Japanese style builds in this small of a space. I just feel like you can't get enough detail in, which you need when you're trying to do these Japanese builds. I think I got the proportions a bit off in this build, and the colours weren't quite right either. But here's the final outcome. Yeah, I've done better. Day 84, I had the idea to build a house using quite simple materials. So mainly using wood, a bit of mud, stone, all of these materials really you can gather early game. And I started building this fun shape with a main area, a little bit coming off the front, a side area made out of stone, and then I only got this roof, which is quite nice, a nice shape on it. Added a tower in the back and added some details out the front, including some plant pots. And yeah, this is how it turned out. I think it's quite a nice build, quite a fun shape. And you got some nice colours in there as well, which helps. For day 85, still feeling bad about my bad attempts at a Japanese build on day 83, I decided to do another Japanese build. The idea for this one is it's a bit more rural, lots of wood, and I use those banners in to kind of create those Japanese sort of dividers sort of. Added on this roof with a bit of detail, and then added on this pond in front of it to kind of create this rural, tranquil sort of Japanese scene. I think this turned out quite nice. I think maybe I used a bit too much spruce and it kind of blends all a bit in together, but apart from that, I think the shape's good. At 86, I decided to build some futuristic sort of colourful builds, a couple colourful street builds. So I started building this first one out of blue with lots of acacia trims and stuff like that. Next to that, I built an orange build at the bottom that had a white bit on top. The idea was this, to use loads of detail, use loads of different blocks, and just try and, yeah, cram in as much detail as possible. And I think I did alright. Lots of colours going on, with the plant pots at the front as well. I think that's quite a nice touch on that table. And yeah, I'm happy with how this build turns out. For day 87, I wanted to build something a little bit more simple, so I had the idea of building an A-frame cabin. So I started off laying these frames on the side of it and then filling in the roof with the deep slate. Came around to the front and used a bit of a gradient of wood types, which I think worked out quite nicely with dark oak, mangrove, jungle, and the strip spruce. And I really like the shape of it. I think it's turned out really nicely. I wasn't expecting big things from when I had the idea, but I think the execution was really good. Added on a few trees as well, and some rocks for the scenery, and I'm really happy with how this one's turned out. For day 88, I started off by just putting down quite a simple shape, just a square foundation with this gradient of moss, and then having the white bit on top. I think this creates quite a nice pattern. Added on the roof using copper, and then added a load of details on. I kind of wanted this to be like a steampunk sort of vibe with gears, chimneys, that water wheel, and stuff like that, but still having its roots in reality. And this is what I came up with. I really like it actually. I think the colours all work quite nicely together, and there's a lot of life in it as well, thanks to the cogs and water wheels and stuff like that. Day 89, I had the idea to do my own take on a woodland mansion. So I started off by laying down these two towers at the front, using these different types of dark woods, including the mangrove wood, which is quite a nice extra texture in there. Behind the two towers, I added on this main segment of the house, lots of detail, and I'm actually really happy. I love the window that I put in the front there. I think that's come out so nicely. It's such a fun shape, and using the signs as well, I think that's come out really well. Added on a load of decoration to the front, including a plant pot, and yeah, I really like this, how it's come out. It's only a simple little build. I think the orange, the acacia matches against the dark oak really well, and I think it looks really cool. I am determined to be able to make it go to work on this scale. So for day 90, we're revisiting the Japanese style, and I think I finally got it right. So the way I achieved that was just keeping the walls fairly simple, not putting a load of texture on them or depth or anything like that, and just keeping them flat. Then the roofs, I used the third stage of copper, which I think is really nice, complements the colours really well. And yeah, I think I finally got it. I finally nailed it, and I'm really happy with how it's come out. So this is definitely the best pagoda we've done so far. For day 91, I decided to build like a holiday house sort of type vibe, somewhere you might see in like one of those very white stone Greek areas in the Mediterranean. The idea was to build these different steps up of the house, of the base of the garden and stuff like that, adding a swimming pool in. And then coming onto the main house, I really wanted to use the copper and use them as windows. And I had a little balcony on the top as well. On the side, I added a little, I don't know what that would be, a veranda sort of thing, with the vines and stuff crawling over it, and then a load of plant pots. And I think it's quite a nice little build. It's only simple, but I think there's quite a nice lot of detail and a vibe that it gives off. For day 92, I decided just to build up this simple shape. Outside of this house, I just wanted to build a very just rectangular shape and not do too much in complexity of that, have all of the complexity in the detail, and I think I achieved that. Added on the balcony on the side, and I used a lot of different blocks, a lot of different texturing stuff, and I think it's turned out really well. I never normally go quite this detailed, but I think I'm definitely learning a lot doing these sorts of methods. I like lots of different bits, and I added a load of plant pots in as well, just had a bit more colour in the leaves as well, and I think it's a really fun design. For day 93, I had the idea of building a house on top of a bridge. So I started laying down this river and then adding on some side bits and then building this main bridge over the river. On top of that, I started up building this structure. I ended up having two structures. This first one using lots of whites and lots of different wood colours. Then the second one, I used mainly yellow colours, and then on top of that, green colours. And again, it's just adding in a load of detail, and I'm just experimenting and getting more comfortable adding in these details and just getting a better idea of what I should add. And I really like the outcome of this. It's really fun, and inside a big city, I think it would be really cool. Day 94, and I can't believe we've not done this yet, but I decided to do some hobbit holes. So the main attraction of these hobbit holes is kind of those circular doors. That's the main feature I wanted to include, and then of course being hidden underground. And so I started doing these rolling hill sort of design, and I think they've come out really nicely. I think the shapes I've done work really well, and added in a load of detail. I did contemplate putting a tree on, but I decided it would take away kind of from the more meadowy sort of vibe. But I really like how these turned out, and having a whole landscape full of these I think would be really cool. For day 95, I had the idea of building an American colonial sort of house. I finally upgraded to 1.21.4, so that means we've got these new white blocks, and I think it works really nicely for this sort of style. One technique I really enjoyed in this build was using the glazed cyan, I think it's glazed light grey terracotta, but it looks cyany, just to create these kind of windows, these circle shapes over the windows, and I think that's a really fun effect. It just helps round it off and adds a different shape in. But yeah, I'm super happy with this. It's quite simple, but it looks super cool. Day 96, I decided to build up these two main foundations. First side, the main tower. I experimented with putting a little roof on the middle part, but I decided against it in the end. Came up, built a small structure at the front of it, and then started building up the second tower. Added a bridge between the two of them. One of the techniques I really wanted to use for this build was with the roof, using colours to make the lightest bits look like that's where the sun's hitting, and then darker bits on the other side. Added a river and then a load of stony terrain, which I think turned out really nicely. I think the colours were really fun, and that little pop of cyan I got in there I think is a really nice little touch. For day 97, I was sort of running out of ideas, so we've kind of gone back to the sort of house we've done loads of times before, just a sort of medieval house. I wanted to try doing a little yellow gradient for the walls. It's turned out alright. I mean, it's nothing to write home about, and then the mossy roof. Overall, it's quite a nice looking house. It's a little bit chunky maybe, but I think there are some fun colours in there, and it's just getting used to adding a little bit more detail in. But yeah, it's just a fairly ordinary looking house for this stage of the challenge. For day 98, I decided to build a Japanese sort of fish shop. So I started up building the downstairs area and added a little market stall out the front of it where lad's going to sell fish is the idea. Coming up onto the second floor using a white colour and used beehives as the divider between the two floors, which is quite nice. Added in some decoration including the fish, some signs, and I think this turned out really nicely. I've added a load of details into this build and I think it's really fun and has a load of life happening in it, and I'm really happy with the colours as well. Day 99, and we've got this day and then one more to go, and then we've completed the challenge. So I had to go big for day 99, and this is by far like over double the longest build that we've done so far. This build took just under 2 hours, and you might be able to see why. So I started off with a deep slate base, and then I decided to do the steampunk theme, kind of carrying on from some of the steampunk builds we've done earlier on. Using orange roofs and lots of wood and deep slate. We've got these huge structures, including these chimneys out to the right. Added on some life, including a windmill around the back, some copper gears, and then adding in the smoke coming out the chimneys. And this is a super detailed, super big build, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. And now we've finally reached day 100 of this challenge. What a challenge! Wow, this has been really cool and very long. So thank you all for watching to this point. For day 100, to celebrate, I decided to do kind of a cyberpunk style building. So the idea is that you've got this monolith of stone, and on top of that you've got an old Japanese temple. Coming down the monolith, they've built a cyberpunk city on the side, so they've added on a load of different apartments. See on the left rather, got an advertising board celebrating our 100 days. Added on 4 different little apartment buildings and a second smaller Japanese sort of temple with that roof. Coming back, adding a load of detail to create that cyberpunk feel, and we've done it. Day 100. And there we go. That's 100 days completed. What a challenge this has been. Taken over 3 months to do, and we built so much cool stuff, so many different styles, and I'm super happy with what we've done. If you did make it to the end of the video, I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. I don't know if I'm going to do more like this, but maybe like it. Definitely not going to do this again, because this was a big challenge. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.